Awesome. Thank you guys. That was very informative. I think you guys did a great job. I'm very pleased to be able to be here, and I look forward to this every year. As John said, it's cool to see how far people have come and how much we've been able to grow this event. So, my job today is to talk through some of the, we'll say, FAQs we had from this previous season and some of the things we can do to help improve those things. And also a few other software related things to help your job become easier throughout this whole season. On the hardware side, one of the key things we saw this year was related to contact on some of on the sensors of the new sensor, the CropX sensor. And so we're going to go over some best practices on drilling, auger choice, making sure that you're utilizing what we call the offset feature, and how that can play into what makes most sense for you agronomically, and caps, just some quick tips on what you should keep in your truck at all times. So I have a cool thing. We've not tried this before. It's been several years since I've seen it done. Thanks, Nick Lammers. But we've got a couple questions I want everybody to be involved with. So you can scan the QR code to join, or you can type in that URL. So you'll join it from your phone. And then when the slide comes up with the question, you'll also be able to see the question on your phone. You'll select the answer. We'll be able to see all the results live. And you got to keep it for tomorrow too, because I got another presentation. Okay, so the question is, how many hours did you invest traveling to join us? I just kind of thought that was a good introduction to playing with this. Cool. Thank you guys. Thank you for those, especially traveling more than 12 hours. Okay, so first topic, what we said earlier was making sure that we have good contact. It's all about install quality. I'm going to talk a lot about that in the next 10 to 15 minutes. We had a webinar early in the season last year, sometime around March or April. And since then, we've learned some things. And here is a list and some images of the auger options generally available to CropX customers. This includes a new addition to our tool set. This auger will be available for the 2024 season and will be coming with the install kits in the next coming months. So this is the one that you're used to, this middle one here. One special thing to point out are these markings that color coordinate with the different offset options you have when you're installing the sensor. This auger on the bottom are for those folks that had some legacy Syntex sensors, or maybe those folks that chose to use this auger ahead of us procuring this new style auger. So a couple of things. Here's a zoomed in feature or a picture. Again, these bands color coordinate with the color associated with the offset setting in the app. So if your augers don't have this, I would recommend making these marks. And it's just at 22, 24, and 26 inches, which is easy to remember because that's how deep the deepest sensor would be, depending on what offset you choose. And no, I'm going to keep harping on this, but this is important. So here's why I think we had a little bit of difficulty. And this is all about the depth that you drill the hole. So with the previous standard auger, you have a 26 millimeter diameter. This bottom sensor is 24.5 millimeters. Okay, so what happens if you drill past this point? You have a hole that's bigger than that sensor. And what happens when you don't have tight soil contact up against that sensor? You're measuring air. Well, air isn't very wet. Okay, so you're going to see a lower value. That's an important thing to remember here in a little bit. Lower values, right? Air is dry, water's wet. If you have air pockets, that's going to generally provide a drier sensor reading. And so one reason people chose to implement maybe one of these legacy augers was because it did fit that requirement a little better. And then here is the current design of the new auger. So 23.5 millimeter tip, bit undersized, and a 26 millimeter main diameter on the main spiral. But we're talking about depth, right? So when it comes to where those markings are on the auger and where those markings tell you to drill in the app on the offset feature, is not this deep on the sensor, it's that deep, right? So that is our current operating practice, right? So this is how deep you should go, and why I don't think we had a ton of issues, but the issues we did have, I think, are probably caused from the folks that might have just went past that point. Okay, so this is what not to do. This is what to do. Not to do, to do. So just keep going until those markings reach the soil level. So here's a screenshot of the app and where you select that offset feature. I had a lot of people this year that didn't realize that this existed. What configuration makes the most sense for what crop you're in, or what soil you're in? That's up to you. For me, my best practice is actually to use the maximum offset. I like having a sensor a little bit higher in the ground, and mainly where I'm coming from is heavier soils in soy and corn. We get rain events. Folks like to maybe not irrigate as much as our recommendations are. So when you have smaller amounts of water added to the profile, they don't go as deep. And sometimes they may not go deep enough to even be detected by an 8-inch deep sensor. Happened a lot. My sensor doesn't work, cries the grower. You call us, we go, well, they're putting on 40 hundredths of water. In heavier soils, that's not going to go very far, especially in a drought year. So that's my go-to is the 4-inch offset. So again, you have all of these different combinations. So you basically have 3 combinations: 8, 16, 26 could be the default, 6, 14, 24, or 4, 12, 22. Pick your poison. So, what are the depths of a CropX sensor? Cool. Thank you, guys. Yes, the answer is all the above, right? All of those combinations are possible. So again, just to review here, this was a test I did towards the very beginning of the product launch. And in this test, I was using actually a fairly undersized auger. This was an 18 millimeter auger. This is in a silt loam soil. I used that Syntec yellow auger and then the standard auger that we had in the install kit this year. And I over drilled these on purpose. And here was the result. So exact same soil, exact same time, all within a few feet of each other. And what do we notice about the measurements here? So plus or minus 2 or 3% at this top sensor, plus or minus 2 or 3% at the middle sensor, but we're almost 20% different on this larger diameter auger at the bottom sensor. It's drier, right? Could we use that data? Is that data still valuable throughout the rest of the season? It's yes, right? That's the short answer, right? What's important in water management is relative change, right? In a lot of sense. But when we can avoid that situation, we might as well, right? Let's get it right from the get-go. So, next poll. How deep should you drill a hole where the bottom sensor is at 26 inches? So our offset is all the way. So we got an 8, 16, 26 configuration. How deep should we drill? Ah, come on, who's playing with me? Deepest sensors at 26 inches, we're gonna drill 26 inches. I apologize for all of the metric system folks. I didn't want to put both. Very good. All right, 26 inches for 26 inches, right? That's easy enough to remember. Now, here is the next important thing. So, how do you know? Maybe you accidentally went too deep. Maybe you ended up with an air pocket anyway. How do I know right off the bat whether or not I might have a problem or I'm okay? Well, within the first minute or two, you're going to get a notification telling you what your first reading is. You install the sensor with your phone tells it to transmit, goes to the cloud, comes back, notifies you and says, hey, here's your first reading. Within that notification, it tells you the raw volumetric water content values. So yes, you guys are getting this right, but you fumbled the other one. Oh, come on. No, this is perfect. All right, everybody's definitely getting it. Okay, so what first reading has poor contact at the 26-inch sensor? And yes, they should be listed from top to bottom, right, left to right. All right, yes, the answer is A, right? So we have a difference of almost 19%, which was exactly the example I showed from my test. So we have a big difference, right, compared to the other sensors. That's a red flag. What would you do in that case? I don't have a poll question for this, but best practice would be to take it out and drill a new hole. Is it possible to have an exception to this? Maybe, right? But you would have to have some extreme soil stratification, right? If you go from a heavier soil to a very light soil, or maybe the other way around. Like generally, those things are going to follow what soil you're drilling your hole into. So here's an example from 2023 where we were utilizing no offset. This is in a wheat field. And yes, this poor field did not get rain from May 20th until June 30th. I think it still did pretty good though. And then here's an example where we utilize the offset feature. So the first sensor starting all the way up at 4 inches. This top sensor is much more sensitive to moisture changes, right? It's higher up in the profile. I add less water. It senses that easier than it otherwise would be if it was lower. Okay, on to the next topic. Any questions yet on install
We do
best
have
practices?
one question here so far. Question is, what if your soil is too dry or heavy to short drill the pilot hole and screw the probe in to get adequate contact?
Yeah, good question. So I think the answer is like the tip of that sensor extends another 4 or 5 inches. What if I absolutely can't get the sensor to penetrate that last bit without actually drilling that hole? So one is let's get the new auger, so we shouldn't have to worry about that if you need to do it. Two is adding water, which should be already part of our best practices, right? We've talked about that in other install webinars. It's part of our guides. Water helps. If it's very dry, even pouring a little bit of water into the hole, or even wetting the bit, which is what I do every time, that's going to help penetrate that last bit.
Got another question that came in. Why are the sensors on the device at the 8, 16, and 26-inch levels?
So I think like when we designed the hardware, why did we choose that configuration? Well, for those folks that have been around for years, essentially it's a hybrid of our previous 2 versions. We felt that this meets the needs of a lot of crops, and balancing the benefits of more sensors with the other side of cost and installation ease, right? So like that's how we kind of decided on this. We enabled the software side of it to provide more flexibility for that configuration of the different offsets, right? So I think it's a very good configuration for the majority of your use cases. There are some use cases where deeper sensors might be necessary, and we can address those kind of on an as needed basis. Anything else? Cool. Okay, so this is also important. For the folks that purchased the sensor last year, the new sensor, we sent out some caps early on in the year. And this was to help protect against moisture, UVs, and initially we sent you some black ones. Those are some, well, that's what we were able to drum up very quickly and provide enough supply for the demand we had. This is the current version, which will come with all new sensors. And we will provide you with this style for all of your existing sensors. This is silicone. So the advantages here is it's flexible, right? So you just flip it up to scan the QR code and the antenna goes right over the top. So all sensors should have this, again, just as an extra protective layer. And increases visibility. Yeah, we chose orange because of visibility. I know that's not going to work for every situation, so there are things you should do to help increase your visibility besides this, but PowerPoint. So here's a list of a couple things that everybody should have. This list is very small compared to the folks that have been around for years and years. The parts for both the sensor and the telemetry are interchangeable now. The battery, the antenna cable, and the antenna paddle, that's it. And that's your list right there. I mean, besides your phone, right? Everything happens via Bluetooth as far as troubleshooting, so you're probably going to be carrying that anyway, so that's easy. Caps, extra sensors, always good to have extra sensors. If you have installed 100% of your inventory, you should probably get a couple more sensors. Here is the design for the extensions and the bars that come with the install kits. That was kind of a little bit later spring development. We got that implemented into the install kits. So if anybody's ever missing these parts, just get in contact with us. We can make sure and get you the stuff you need. Yes, you could always just use this simple straight bar to turn your sensor in. But the reason we added this here was to make it easier to put the sensor in a tall crop, right? So mostly corn. You might have a corn plant that's already 1 or 2 feet tall. It's pretty tight spacing to get between that 6 or 7 inch spacing in the corn plants. So if you can get that handle up above it, you're less likely to damage the plants that you're installing the sensor next to. So another pro tip, protect your cables. Thank you, Paul, for the image here. So we get some samples back from the field, and sometimes they look like this. Could be rabbits. I think some folks in the West have even said coyotes really, really get after them. I know the folks from New Zealand often struggle with even cows, right? Where's Eton? Yeah, yeah. They're like munching on things. I'm not sure this will stop a cow, but this is going to stop a lot of rodents. So nylon is our recommended material. So nylon cable protector. I know some folks in the past that have used like braided stainless sleeves or other items, but this is pretty easy. It's cheap, and we also have it available for order if you need some. Okay, we get a lot of questions about how I know if my sensor's working. And John mentioned the improvements to this process, but I just want to make sure everything's very, very clear for all the folks in the room, because you don't want to leave the field unless you know it's good to go. So here's how this works. And part of my goal here is just to give you a better understanding of what's happening when you scan that QR code. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background, so I'll kind of fill you in. So the first thing to know is obviously you're using a QR code, right? That QR code is located on the sensor, and it's a 7-digit value, right? It's usually a V as in Victor, it starts on the sensors, or a G as in golf that starts on the telemetry. And what that does is say, hey, here is the serial number of the sensor I'm trying to install. And then it looks for that Bluetooth device within range and attempts to connect with it. So that device, just like your AirPods or your Google Home or whatever other Bluetooth speaker you use to play some music, there's a name. And that name of that Bluetooth device has to be and match that QR code. So it joins with your phone and it says, hey, you were in hibernation mode, because these things are on all the time, unless you take the battery out, of course, right? But these things are on all the time. And when you connect to it, you say, I'm going to switch from a hibernation mode to an active mode. And that means that it's going to measure on whatever interval it's designed to measure and transmit on. And then once it tells it that, then it says, hey, well, go ahead and take a measurement now and then transmit it. So all of that happens within a few seconds. And then after that, you get this screen. So this screen tells me that I was able to connect with my sensor. I was able to tell it to transmit and measure and transmit. And now I'm waiting. I'm waiting for it to transmit, get to the cloud, have our server check it, and then the server gets back with us and says, here's your notification, the QR, the field name, and your username, and the battery and volumetric water content values of the first reading. So that is where you can also, again, check your install quality. So all this happens within an average of probably 1 or 2 minutes. A lot of times it's even down to 30 seconds. So somewhere in that ballpark is what you should expect. If this fails, there's other steps in the app that help you navigate, whether it's because you couldn't connect to the sensor via Bluetooth, or maybe this part of the process fails. It didn't receive the transmission. You were able to connect with the sensor and tell it what to do, but it didn't work. So there's steps in the process that guide you through that. But that's not the only thing we can do. When we keep adding to this list, I did some design, so this is not my best design work. I'm not a designer. And I know there's a lot of detail here. I think this would be a good thing to add to the knowledge base. But here's all the stuff you can do. So we can install it. We talked through that process. We can do the pre-installation diagnostics, which John talked you through. That's what you would use before the install to say, hey, what's my battery? Did it transmit? Gives you the resulting screen. And then once a sensor is installed, you can run a diagnostics after it's already installed. What's that going to do? It's going to simply say, hey, measure, transmit, and then run through that same process that we just talked about and notifying you whether or not you received an updated transmission, right? So it triggers that notification process. A few other things you can do, you can change the network. So not applicable to Verizon, right? Verizon's a lone wolf. But for the folks that are not on Verizon and have the correct configuration of sensor, they can choose a network. Its behavior is it will choose the best network available by default, but for some reason you might need to change that. That's possible. This is new. You can restore factory. Generally, this has to do with if you have a sensor that for some reason has the Bluetooth name incorrect, you can fix that. Just so for heads up, you can do a reset. All that's basically going to do is clear the data from the sensor. So the sensor could be storing data. Maybe it hasn't been transmitting. It's always going to store the data. It's going to keep reading and storing that data in there. If you reset it, it clears that. Just a note here. Whenever you reset a sensor, you'll hear a beep. And you'll also hear that same beep when you reinstall the battery. Right? That's basically the same process. A few other notes that you can do here. You can download the data. If you have a sensor that's not transmitting, you might want to download all the data that it's collected over the past however many days. It'll upload it from your phone. Or you can use that BLE scanner that John mentioned. That's always good to check, say, hey, is my sensor alive? Yes or no? Okay, poll. How do I know if my sensor transmitted before I leave the field? Ah, someone's messing with me again. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you guys. Yes, the notification system. Okay, just a quick little thing. I learned this doing extractions. For the folks doing extractions, this is a very easy way to get to the sensor and deactivate it while you're even still in the field. So field sensors, those are the two sections, both in web and mobile, right? So under the sensors section, you can go to a map view, and then you just click on this GPS icon, and it snaps your map to where you are. Well, if you're standing fairly close to the sensor, that little sensor icon is going to be right there. If you click on it, it'll bring it up right here. And you can click on what we call the actions menu of that sensor, and you can deactivate it right there. So within about 2 seconds, I can navigate to the sensor where I can deactivate it. And you want to deactivate your sensor when you take it out of the ground. Otherwise, it will keep working and give you some funny data because air is dry. And it's going to be using a lot of battery or more battery than otherwise would be in hibernation mode. One more addition to the list view. No, I'm sorry, table view. That's the right term. So table view. For the folks using telemetry with a third-party sensor. This was a late add in the season in 2023, but we have two different timestamps here. One is the last transmission, and the other is the last reading of the sensor. Why is that important? For the folks using that type of a sensor, sometimes, again, rodents in that cable management slide I had might disconnect that sensor for you. And if that happens, your telemetry device doesn't know what's going on with the sensor anymore, right? You do not have readings from the sensor anymore, but the telemetry is working. So these two different timestamps can be different in that case. So that's there. John pretty well covered these other tips of navigation in CropX. The only one I wanted to mention, and yes, I'm going to live demo. Everybody think I'm crazy. That's where my parents live. Isn't it pretty? No, Kansas. Okay, so John mentioned the navigation between the fields and the sensors tabs, as well as all of the filters available. I want to add to that just a little bit. So if I filter my fields to whatever I want to look at, maybe it's growers, maybe it's different crop types. This is how I have this is probably the other part of that double productivity equation, John. While I keep this tab open in my browser, and I know this only really applies to those folks that are using a computer. This is not necessarily if you're out in the field, but for those really looking at lots of fields every week, both the table view and the card view allow you to open these fields in another tab. So I right-clicked on that field here, and then I'm going to open it in a new tab. And you can see up in the top left corner, my browser is loading that field. And if I do this about, I was opening about 20 or 30 at a time, actually. All that information is loading in the background as I'm making those clicks. And then when I'm ready to review that field, I can see it, make whatever adjustments I need to do, whatever you need to do to manage that field. And then when you're done, You close that tab and move on to the next one. You increase efficiency because you're not waiting for those pages to load and you're navigating back and forth between the list and the field and the list and the field and list and the field. So for those folks doing a lot of reviewing fields every week, this is a biggie. Okay, well, are we on time? All
We
right.
do have some questions that have come
All
in.
right, what do we got?
First question is the sensor cap required or just recommended?
The sensor what? Sorry.
The sensor cap. the cover.
Required. Why wouldn't you use it? You have a good reason?
All right, next question is, are the first moisture readings that you receive right after an install usually accurate, or does it take the sensor a day or two to correct those readings?
Good question. So the question is about what maybe the level of quality of those first readings. I would say high. Unless you're using an excessive amount of water at install, they're really not going to change. There's not a calibration period or anything like that. I mean, the sensor is just sensing how much water is in that soil. And that's pretty much it.
Next question is, how long is it when a sensor goes offline before we get a notification or indication in the app?
Good question. So the offline status in the app will trigger at 48 hours. That's the current behavior. Yep.
And last question is, will the probe's Bluetooth connect to your phone when you get close to it for extraction? And would it be possible to get it to make a beeping sound?
So you could do the beep sound with the reset function. Obviously, the downside to that is if you didn't want to clear the data, then you wouldn't want to do that. But once you're within range of that sensor, you should be able to connect to it with your phone and see it on either your scanner or as you're attempting to actually connect with it through whatever tool you're attempting to connect with it. Just to reverse on that second to last question with the offline status, I think that's something that we could explore and get smarter about, as well as not only the number of hours that it triggers, but notifications. So that's something that has been certainly discussed. So if you have thoughts about that, might be a good thread topic.
Another question, two other questions came in here is, first, will the old drill bits be replaced by CropX for growers who have the old version of the sensor and got to the new one?
So I think the question is, if you're upgrading from the old sensor to the new sensor, are we going to provide you new kits for free? No, that is not a current plan. One thing I did forget to mention, though, that goes along with that, because we're going to that different style of auger, that will require a price increase. But we do think that is well worth the data quality output with that. So it's kind of a balancing act between those two factors, cost versus benefit.
And the last question that just came in, it's a great one with our product team in the room. Is there an option to have the CropX status or recommendations, I'm guessing insights are meant here, push to the customer via text every day?
I think that one came up yesterday. John, you want to take that? The question was about some sort of notification delivery system from the insights feature. Is that right? Yep. Yeah, it's definitely something we've talked about. I think it's I think that's pretty high priority and on our radar. Okay, I answered the question according to Dimry's guidance. That it?
That's it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Nick. So we are at lunchtime. I'm sure you've all worked up an appetite.